The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We will get started in just about 1 minute. We do still have a few people logging in, so we'll give them a chance to join us, and then we will get going. Okay, looks like it's time for us to get started. So welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Brown, and I'm with the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, Transition and Employment Projects. I'll be your moderator for today. Today's webinar is sponsored by Children's Special Health Services and the Montana Deaf-Blind Project, and is funded in whole or in part under contracts with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. The statements shared in the presentation do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the departments. All of our audience members are currently muted. This helps cut down on background noise so that we can hear the presenters better. If you want to ask the presenters a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment into the chat or question box. And please note that only you, the moderator, myself, and the presenters will be able to see what you have typed into that box. If you don't see the chat or the question box right now, look to the upper right-hand area of your computer screen, and there should be an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that white arrow, it will open the dashboard, and one of the options on that dashboard should say chat or questions, and that's when you can type it, where you can type in anything that you would like to ask the presenters or any comments that you would like to make. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and it can take up to a couple of weeks to get those sent out. Please note that you must have pre-registered in order to receive the OPI credit, and unfortunately, we're unable to issue other kinds of attendance documentation at this time. Today's session is being audio taped for the Transition and Employment Project's resource library, and the recording for the webinar, along with the materials and the PowerPoint, will be posted to the Transition and Employment Training Archives page. I've put the URL or website address for the archives page in your chat box, so you should be able to see that. And those will be posted as soon as possible. The slides for today's presentation are already available for download in the handouts area on your screen. And again, if you don't see the handouts area on your screen, go to the upper right-hand section of your screen. You'll see an orange box with a white arrow in it. Click on that, and one of the options that should open up on your dashboard says Handouts. We have the PDF version of today's slideshow saved there, along with some other handouts that will be described during the webinar. At the end of today's webinar, a survey will pop up. It's a short 8-question survey, and we do ask that you please take the time to complete that survey. We review all of the responses that we receive, and we use those to decide about topics for future webinars and also to try to continually improve the training that we're offering. So again, when that survey pops up, please do take the time to answer the 8 questions. And with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce and thank our speakers for today. We're very lucky to have back with us from part 1, Ellen Condon. Ellen is the Transition and Employment Projects Director and the Montana Deaf-Blind Project Director at the University of Montana's Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, where she's worked since 1996 on transition and employment for youth with significant disabilities. She is also a consultant with Mark Golden Associates and works part-time for the National Center on Deaf-Blindness. Ellen has worked in the field of developmental disabilities since 1986. Prior to coming to Montana, her experiences included hands-on service delivery, program development, and program management in community residential and supported employment programs. She received her master's degree in special education from Boston College in 1990 after completing coursework in transition and supported employment. At the Rural Institute, she has served as the principal investigator and project director for numerous federal and state-funded grants. She provides technical assistance, training, and on-site support to schools, agencies, individuals, and families, predominantly in the areas of customized employment, transition, and systematic instruction. And today, for part 2 of the webinar, we are also very pleased to welcome Melissa Dadman. Melissa is a project coordinator for the Montana Deaf-Blind Project at the University of Montana's Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities and a course instructor for the Department of Teaching and Learning. Melissa has recently worked as a project coordinator for the Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center, curriculum developer for transition-focused curriculum for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and project coordinator for the Intro to College program, a program where high school students gained access to work-based learning experiences in an integrated campus setting. While working on her master's in education and special education endorsement, Melissa participated in the Training Teachers to Ensure Achievement and Membership, or T-Team project, whose mission is to increase the capacity of schools and teachers to provide effective instruction to students with low-incidence disabilities. Melissa has experience working with elementary, high school, and post-secondary age students. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ellen, who will get us started in today's presentation.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just switching over. Welcome back, everybody. This is Ellen Condon, and we are returning to the session, Transition from School to a Full Adult Life. And this is the second session where we're going to be talking about some more specifics of transition strategies, but also looking at connecting to adult service agencies, specifically in Montana. So before we launch into Montana, I just want to, review some of the highlights from the last session. A lot of what we talked about are the new opportunities for transition that have been brought to us by new legislation, specifically WIOA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also the final settings rules. So there's a huge focus on movement from segregated only options to real life, real wages in the community. When we look at the expectation under WIOA, it's really changing the perspective of our perspectives of who we think can work and who is ready to work in the community. And one of the main messages under WIOA is that people or students with disabilities should be able to make an informed choice about whether they want to work in a sheltered setting or whether they want to work in a job in the community for real wages, competitive integrated employment. And the only way for people to make that choice is to be able to try it out. And that's most likely going to happen when they're students. So part of what we're going to share today are some other strategies around how do we think about employment for people with the most significant disabilities while they are in school. And how do we, because if we can't give people a realistic experience, then how do they really make an informed choice? Because if you've only experienced one or the other, then it's not really a choice. So the other thing that's really exciting about WIOA is that there's a lot of opportunities for school and voc rehab to collaborate. It's actually mandated under WIOA. And how that happens in states is going to look differently, and it's going to depend on the memorandum of agreements between those state agencies. But one of the things that we heard last session is that when agencies collaborate, transition outcomes are better. If we can share resources and have everybody set on the goal of individualized work experience leading to competitive integrated employment as a post-school outcome for students, and we're working together, there's a far better likelihood that those outcomes are going to come to fruition. We also need to engage families in the transition process and also know that families of students with significant needs, if they have the expectation that their son or daughter is going to work in a paid job after graduation, that is far more likely going to happen. So we need to pay a lot more attention to making sure families know what transition is, how to participate in transition planning, how to effectively engage with adult agencies, and also how to think about their son or daughter working in the community. And mostly, WIOA, I think, really gets us to raise the bar and have much higher expectations for students with disabilities, even students with the most significant disabilities. So again, what we learned about work experience last session is that, students are far more likely to be employed after graduation if they have had a paid job while they're in school. So not just stipends, but an actual competitive integrated employment opportunity where they're paid by an employer for doing job tasks. Folks who have work experience are better off. And those work experiences need to begin early in high school, but happen throughout high school. And again, family expectations are key. If families really don't see their son or daughter working and can't envision that, that really impacts the likelihood of whether or not that child is going to go to work. And families who are supported to navigate the adult service system are far more likely to be successful. Their students are far more likely to be successful in employment after high school. So as we're thinking about how to have that expectation that people are going to work, that young people are going to work, I think a lot of that vision can be influenced by what schools are using for age-appropriate transition assessments. Now, the age-appropriate transition assessments are a required part of transition, part of that transition process that begins during the IEP in which that student turns 16 or earlier if appropriate. But if we're using age-appropriate transition assessments that highlight what a student can do, where they're at their best, how they do things. Say this is a young person who doesn't communicate verbally. How did they interact with other people? People they know, people they don't know. How do they communicate what they like and don't like? How do they communicate that they need help on the job? What are their skills? What are their potential job tasks? If that information is what we're getting in an age-appropriate transition assessment, that makes it so much easier for the IEP team, and including the family and the outside agencies, to be thinking in terms of what does work experience look like for this student? What does a future job look like? However, if our age-appropriate transition assessments are highlighting everything that the student can't do, where they need to improve, maybe a list of behaviors that may interfere with work, that's not going to help us see the potential of community employment for the individual. So especially for students with more significant disabilities, what I'd like to encourage you to do is think about a strategy called discovery. And this is a strategy which is the basis of customized employment. And it just gets us thinking about who the student is. And instead of describing the student in terms of evaluative comments, instead we think about rich information about the student that you would collect through observations or interviews with people who know the person best. And I'm not suggesting that we gloss over any support needs or any behavioral challenge, not at all. We just want to think in terms of how do we support the person so they can be best and most successful in an environment where they're going to perform job tasks. What environments work? What environments don't work? So as you're compiling information, you're optimistic about creating a position where this person's going to go to work instead of thinking about all the reasons they're going to have a difficult time going to work. And this is a site, the National TA Center on Transition. They have a whole area on transition planning, but also a whole age-appropriate transition assessment toolkit. So if you are looking for resources about transition assessments, this is a fabulous resource, and it's free. And they even talk about some of the informal assessments that would be helpful for somebody with a more significant disability. And so again, as I think about the distinction between a formal assessment versus the process of discovery, which qualifies as an informal assessment, a formal assessment would evaluate. So it may compare the student with the disability, compare their skills and their support needs to other people. That doesn't help me envision a job for them. What I need instead is factual information. If this person, a part of who they are is their impact of disability impacts their mobility. Tell me how they do get around. What helps them navigate an environment safely? What type of environment would be best for them? Is it someplace where they don't do steps, or there's an accessible entrance, or all their work materials are reachable from chair height? Instead of talking about the negatives, talk about what works and what the positives are. And so the information is going to be more narrative. It's going to be more descriptive and non-judgmental and non-evaluative. It's going to be, when you're thinking about what you're collecting, you want to collect the facts. And so leave your opinion out of it. And the reason for that is that when the team gets together and looks at the factual information, it's so much easier to then translate that into ideal conditions for success, like what kind of environment this person needs for a work experience, what kind of supports, what kind of tasks. And everybody can come to the same conclusion. So I'm going to give you an example. And this is a young man who I'm going to call Wyatt, somebody I worked with years ago. And so when I first got to know him and got to know the school, I asked the school, well, what are you thinking about for employment for Wyatt when he exits high school? And basically they said, we don't think anybody's ever going to hire him. He's prompt dependent. He doesn't do anything without people telling him what's next and what to do. He needs one-to-one support at all times. And he's so slow. Who would ever pay him minimum wage? He's also really distracted by kids and dogs. And he's never going to be able to tie his shoes. We've been working on that for years in his IEP, and he still can't tie his shoes. So we started out with just a generic work experience, and it happened to be at Super One Foods. And we really thought, after getting to know Wyatt in the school, that he would need a lot of time to get from the school building to the car to his job. After a couple days in the work experience, we were having to ask him to slow down because he was out ahead of us. When we talked to his mom to gather information about him, what we found is that at home, he helped his mom. He wasn't prompt dependent at home. He didn't need one-to-one supervision at home. He was actually in charge of childcare for his younger sister. And his mom really valued his skills, observing his little sister, interacting with her. When the little sister was younger, Mom relied on Wyatt to get things done. We also found that his pace, his rate of travel speed or work speed changed depending on the setting he was in. He didn't wait for somebody to direct him to the next step in a different situation. It was really interesting. And all of a sudden these strengths became obvious. He was precise, he was organized, he paid attention to detail, and he had all these skills in childcare. So part of our age-appropriate transition assessment for him was asking the family what he did at home, and then realizing there was a whole different picture of this young man at home than at school. talking to the family about what his responsibilities at home were at home, we saw a whole different light, him in a whole different light. And what would the family members say that Wyatt's greatest strength was? What we realized is that he had a lot of contribution to make. We just didn't know about it because we didn't ask the right questions, or we didn't see it in different environments. So throughout the course of his high school career, he had a work experience at Super One Foods, where he restocked and organized. He worked in the school's preschool class, helping organize activities for younger kids. And also, he was the one who took charge of consoling the kids when they were upset. And they would go to him for consolation and support. He was good at that. So now on his task list, we can add rocking small crying children. He also had his first paid experience before he exited school. And this was actually at a small business that we didn't even know about. The paraprofessional and I were marketing for him at the local gym, and the woman, when she heard his skills of being precise and being very cautious with fragile items, and very basically he would follow his routine as long as the routine was laid out. She ended up offering him a job, adding various essences and healing oils to make scented sleep masks and other things. And then he also worked for her at the local gym. So again, what added to his age-appropriate transition assessment information were the things that we learned about him. How did his performance change in the different settings? What were his skills? What were his support needs in different settings? And we tried to keep it very factual so it could be translated into supports and information for future work. And this is a picture of him at the preschool. And what we found was that as long as it was clear to him what he was supposed to do, and he didn't have to ask what to do, he would initiate. And he wasn't prompt dependent at all. It just depended on the situation. So some of the challenges as we're thinking about transition planning for students with disabilities is moving from school services to adult services. School services are an entitlement for somebody with a disability. There's one person who serves as the case manager, and all the various services that you qualify and need are all available through that school. And all the school rules all follow the same definition of disability. It's really clear what you're eligible for, what you're not. However, when you cross the line to adult services, you may be eligible for specific adult services, but you may be on a wait list because they're not entitlements for the most part, even if you're eligible. And the wait list is going to vary based on where you live and what you're waiting for. All the services may not have the same criteria. Like Voc Rehab may be a different criteria than developmental disabilities or mental health. And you or your parent may need to be the one figuring out which services you qualify for and how to piece them together. And that's pretty confusing, even for those professionals who have been in the field forever. It's still tricky, and things change. The other piece is that in post-school environments, the services that you get may look different. Job coaching may look really different at school than it does in adult services. School services are usually an 8-hour day, Monday through Friday. But when you receive services through an adult agency, that may not be what's available to you. So starting to work with families early and helping them figure out what a full adult day is going to look like for their son or daughter, and matching them to services that can help with some of those long-term support needs is critical. And this can't be done just the last semester of high school. we should be starting this as early as possible. The other piece is that if you're somebody who's been getting special education services in school and you want to go to college, basically IDEA doesn't cover college. In college, you can have access to the same class and curriculum that anybody else does, but you have to meet the same standards as anybody else. There aren't modifications to curriculum. So making sure that students who are intending to go on to post-secondary ed are taking the necessary classes to get into secondary ed, but are post-secondary ed, but also they are ready for that curriculum if they're going in as a matriculated student. So as we think about how to meet long-term support needs, so if somebody needs ongoing supports to live in their own apartment, to participate in their community, to go grocery shopping, go banking, participate in recreation and leisure, or if they need somebody to help them learn and maintain a job, those are all long-term supports. Sometimes we might want to look at, what do other people in our community do who need supports? You know, sometimes families might be able to help if this person just needs a ride to work, or they need help in the morning getting ready for work. Or maybe that's something you can negotiate with a neighbor or a friend or a roommate. Sometimes coworkers help each other out at work. And part of why I'm talking about informal supports before we go into formal supports is that sometimes everything we need isn't available, or isn't available right when we need it. So we've got to piece a lot of different things together. And so we don't want to assume that formal supports through an adult agency are a necessity or better. Make sure that we look at the supports that are available to any one of us. You know, I rely on a lot of supports to get ready for a webinar. You know, thankfully I work with people who are very organized, like Kim and Melissa, who are on top of things and know how to like prepare those of us who kind of forget what the next step is in a webinar. So the point being that we all rely on supports at work, at home. And so making sure that we don't just jump to the assumption that we need formal supports for every student with a disability. So now I'm going to turn this over to Melissa, who's going to talk about some of the agencies in Montana and what's available. So Melissa, are you up?
I am up. Let me just get this going. Okay, thanks, Ellen. I'm excited to be here with you all today. So as Ellen said, we're going to move into what some of those more formal supports are going to look like. And as we do move into this discussion, it's going to be important to note that this information is really relevant to the state of Montana. So we see that there's quite a few of you joining us from around the country, and we recommend that you connect directly with your state adult agencies to learn more about what it means to connect individuals with supports in your state. So for Montana, adult agencies have been hit really hard with state budget cuts, unfortunately. Over the past 2 budget years, the Health and Human Services is losing $200 million of state funds, and federal funds will be lost as well. So those are some really huge hits, and we're already starting to feel it. But in the wake of these changes, how do we make sure that students and young adults remain connected with adult agencies? How do we keep up with the changes in services that we're going to see over and over again? And then how do we fill in the gaps, like Ellen was mentioning? What are some of those informal supports, and how can we get innovative and creative to make sure that people are still getting their individual needs met while waiting for services? So today we're going to update you as best as we can on current programming and projects happening across the state of Montana. And if we have time at the end, Ellen will share some information on efforts happening in other states, and hopefully that can inspire us to create a new vision for services in Montana. So I'm going to start by just briefly discussing the following Montana adult agencies and address what to do when one is currently receiving services, when one needs to be determined eligible, or when an individual has been put on a wait list. So we'll start with Montana Vocational Rehabilitation and Blind Services, looking at both pre-employment transition services, or PREETs, and then case management. And so even with the current budget cuts, VR is still required to spend 15% on pre-employment transition services for students with disabilities under WIOA. So things look a little different this year than they did last year or the year before that, including school contracts. So for example, schools this year were asked to submit a proposed budget to show exactly how they're going to spend PREETs money. Currently, there are about 35 schools across the state that have contracts with VR, which means that they will continue to be reimbursed for PREET services. VR is also still supporting a few special projects around the state, including the Montana Youth Leadership Forum, or MyLife, Montana Youth Transition, and Moving On, and that one just at Montana State University this year in Billings. They're also doing counselor purchase PREET services, and currently there are about 20 contracts around the state to provide PREET services under that. And so to access this support for an individual, we first need to look to see if the school has a PREET contract. So if the school has a contract, there should be different opportunities across the school year to receive individualized PREET services. However, if the school in Montana does not have a contract, it's recommended to contact your local VR office to talk with the school counselor and discuss the PREET's needs of that individual with that assigned counselor. And so once that student is determined eligible, then VR is able to access the counselor purchase services to meet individual needs. And so when referring students to VR, it's going to be important to avoid what's considered the black hole. And some of you may have heard of this already. But to begin, we have to make sure that before a student applies to VR that they have received some form of PREETs. So once a student applies to VR and is deemed eligible to receive services, they're going to be put on a wait list since all categories are currently closed. However, if the student has already received some form of PREETs, the student can continue to receive PREETs while on the wait list. So we need to avoid the black hole by making sure students have received PREETs before applying to VR services, and school counselors can help walk through that process. We want to make sure that you connect with your local, your regional VR office to get students connected to PREETs, as well as to get on the wait list for VR services. So this is one way we can make sure students are still receiving transition services in a timely manner. With VR case management, anyone not already receiving VR services under an individualized plan for employment will be placed on a wait list. So VR is currently referring people to other workforce development programs and then other programs such as financial aid for attending college. And then when funding allows, they will start to reopen categories and serve those on the wait list, starting with the highest priority, which is category 1. So currently there is still a wait list for all categories 1 through 3. But it's still recommended to get students onto those wait lists and then to support through PREETs during that process. Moving on to Developmental Disabilities Program, and as noted, Montana's DD program has been really hit hard, and we're already seeing the impact of these changes to case management. So Montanans, you might have read on Friday that Helen Industries, who provides job training, work opportunities, and case management services for people in Helena, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, and Anaconda, is closing and filing for bankruptcy due to the state budget cuts to Medicaid programs. And so we're going to keep seeing these things happen across the state. And so we need to make sure that we're getting the information available to see what is it going to look like, what's available for transition age individuals and young adults. In June, they should be rolling out a single contract for DD's case management system. And so the changes are continuing to happen. Looking at the resources that can help you navigate in the meantime are these first two bullets. The first bullet is a PowerPoint, and it's provided on My Transitions website. We also have a link to it at the end of the PowerPoint. And the second is an online guide available on the DPHHS website. So a few things have changed since those two items were made available. And one is that DD has submitted the 0208 comprehensive waiver draft renewal to the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services. So information in the presentation and guide is going to be subject to change upon approval. And that draft can be found on the DPHH website under the Medicaid waivers if you want to take a closer look. Second, the Guide to Success references the Children's Autism Waiver, which is being phased out. So no new children are being enrolled. So let's take a look at the key takeaways. If we look at the Family Education and Support Program, and this service is available for up to 21 years of age, depending on provider capacity. So if receiving FES services, each family receives service coordination, and it's provided by a family support specialist. And there's at least bi-monthly face-to-face visits up to the age of 16. So regional providers maintain the FES waitlists. And so unfortunately, we do not have the current waitlist information, but you can contact your regional office to get some of that, those more specifics. And we've also attached a handout that goes further into FES to this webinar. For case management, there's two types, and the waiver case management is the case management that's available for ages 0 through 22 for people who are currently receiving waiver services. And then the targeted case management services are going to be for ages 16 and above, and this is an entitlement case management service. So these services are going to be defined as helping individuals gain access to medical, social, educational, and other services. And they're going to include a comprehensive assessment or a reassessment of individual needs to determine the need for service. It's also going to include the development of a specific care plan that is based on that information collected through assessment. And then there's going to be referral and related activities to help the eligible individual obtain needed services with monitoring and follow-up of activities. So this is where in targeted case management that managers can be invited to the IEP meetings and help with some of that transition piece. Below the 0208 waiver, or the comprehensive waiver, that one's going to be providing comprehensive support in the community to increase and maintain independence through training, residential, recreational, and vocational supports. And remember, this is the waiver that's subject to change depending on renewal approval. Currently, those determined eligible will be placed on a wait list, and there are approximately 1,700 individuals on the comprehensive waiver wait list. The average length of time can be difficult to determine as it depends on a number of variables. However, right now it's estimated to be a little over 2 years. So if you already have DDP services, you can use the case manager to be part of the transition planning process. It's recommended as early as possible to have individuals referred to see if they're qualified for the DD program. Once you're determined eligible, the individual will be placed on the wait list for the programs such as FES and comprehensive waiver. And then with FES, if they're placed on a wait list prior to age 8, they must be found DD eligible by the specialist prior to the child's 8th birthday in order to continue to receive services and or remain on the wait list. So the question is, how do we fill the gaps when young adults find themselves on a wait list? And once a person who has been found eligible for DD services and is at least 16 years old, this is where that targeted case management comes in really handy. They're entitled to targeted case management. And so it's going to be important for teams to involve that case manager in the transition process. Invite them to the IEP meetings, provide that comprehensive assessment to determine the needs of services, help develop that specific care plan based on that information, and then receive referrals and related activities to help support that comprehensive transition planning process. There is a contact list of regional offices, and it's located on the DPHH website, and that is kept most up to date. If you access that PowerPoint on the Montana Youth Transitions website, there's also information. And then we'll just continue to stay posted to see how things unfold. Again, with mental health services, state budget cuts have really impacted all facets of programming, and this really is going to impact the case management for mental health. Although we do not have a specific Montana program to highlight today, we do recommend checking in with your local regional mental health centers and then any of those school-based mental health programs such as CSCT to learn more about what students, families, and professionals can access in each of your communities. We have a link up at the top, the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, and this group does a lot of work around mental health and transition. They produce tip sheets and toolkits, offer webinars, have a listserv, so it's definitely a site worth investigating. Their mission is to promote the full participation in socially valued roles of transition-age youth and young adults. So it's great. Ages 14 to 30 is the focus, and they have a lot of expertise in serious mental health conditions. So we encourage you to check that out as a resource. The DPHHS resources, they both have more Montana-specific and then nationwide information to help provide you with information and contacts for your local communities. And this last one is a brochure from the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities. It was developed by members of the Montana Transition Training Information and Resource Center Advisory Board. And the purpose was to create awareness of mental health needs of youth with developmental disabilities, as well as to suggest skills they think are important for mental health professionals to have when working with this population. So it's a great brochure, and there are links to these resources as well as an entire slide of additional mental health resources for you to investigate and see if there's tools that you can add to your toolbox. So we encourage you to check them out. So with transition resources for the state of Montana, My Transitions, which is Montana Youth Transitions, is such an excellent resource. These are some of the programs they're currently providing, in addition to the annual transition conference held in the fall. And so the soft skills curriculum, there are 2 tracks to access soft skills training. You can do it through the Soft Skills Youth Academy and a Soft Skills Train the Trainer course. So currently the Academy is free for schools that have not previously had the opportunity to utilize this training. And this is through September 30th of 2018. So if your school could use this is a fantastic opportunity to bring free services into the schools, into the classrooms. So during this time, students will learn there's a bunch of fun interactive activities, and then they learn about the importance of soft skills and leave with a toolbox full of a lot of different strategies, including communication and what it means to have those soft skills to be able to maintain employment, successful employment. The Train the Trainer course is currently only $30 per person, or you can get 4 professional renewal units, which is a pretty fantastic opportunity. And this one's more for parents, teachers, employment specialists, job coaches, or really anyone involved in teaching employment and soft skills to youth and young workers. And then as always, the My Transitions soft skills curriculum is available online, and you can download it for free through the website. And it's just a fantastic curriculum to use throughout the school year or summer programming, one-on-one with students, small groups, large groups. It really can meet a variety of demands. There's also the opportunity for training in student-led IEPs, and this is a pretty exciting one. This is for students, families, educators, and service providers to support the creation of meaningful transition plans, and really focuses on student-led IEPs. So this training can also be scheduled as a class for students, or you could use it as professional development training for staff. So students will learn about the IEP, what it is, why it's important, learn how to express personal interests, learn about goal planning, and then there's time spent on preparing for and facilitating the IEP meeting. And this next one, this transition planning training, it's designed to help youth and parents or guardians prepare for adult life. So the training includes parent-to-parent discussions, parents investigate their role in transition. There's work on how to promote self-determination at home, conducting a family transition needs and preference survey, how to use family-based transition checklist, and then helping families set transition goals. It seems pretty fantastic as well. So both of the flyers for the soft skills and the student-led IEPs are included with this webinar, and then the transition planning training, you can find more information on how to register online, but we encourage people to utilize those resources. They're just really fantastic. My Transition also has regional transition handbooks and resource guides, and we're going to take a moment to access those. So although these regional groups are not funded under this year's VR contract with My Transitions, they do have information still available under their regional area on the website. And then Region 2 and 5, which is Great Falls and Missoula areas, they do still have functioning transition groups, but both of these groups are being directed through their independent living centers. And so check them out for sure, see what's happening. So let's cruise to Montana Youth Transitions and look at Region 4. Oh, here we go. So when you get to the website, you're going to see on this top bar, MYT regions. And when you click on it, you can click on 1 through 5. We are going to take a look at Region 4 real quick. Oh, I'm already up on this. So here's Region 4. They have this great transition timeline that a lot of different regions are using. And so you have access to this information, and you can see where the years are, they unfold along the bottom, and then it's just a checklist for the timeline for a successful transition, along with contact information. But if you scroll down, some independent living centers, this is dependent on the particular independent living center, are also helping with job shadow opportunities. So make sure you connect with those region ILs to see if they have any opportunities for you. And then as you scroll down for this one, you can see even here, there's the Butte Transition Handbook. It's last updated in 2016, the Helena booklet, and then Bozeman Youth Transition Guide. So these are some great resources to look. They really made them specific to the region. And as we talk about changes in adult services, some of this information will change. However, they do have some just good information about transition. There's some surveys that are included, some interest inventories, a little introduction, more information for parents to understand. I love this parent questionnaire that you can go through with your child. So these are just some really great resources that we encourage you to check out. And so again, these regions are located here. You can find the other information around soft skills and different activities for professionals here, and then keep posted on the conference that is in the fall of each year. So with Montana Works, Montana has unfortunately seen several job service locations closed. This includes Hamilton, Dillon, Anaconda, and Lewistown. And this can really make access to services difficult, especially for our state's rural communities. So we need to be thinking creatively, innovative about how do we make sure we maximize the services and the access we do have. How can we partner with existing job services to provide training in schools? How can we ramp up access and knowledge online? How can schools coordinate with job service to provide pre-ets for those schools with contracts? How can you bring in job service agencies while providing pre-ets? And then to also consider, when are there times across the school year where you can pull together groups of youth to learn how to prepare and train for the workforce? So when are there times we can teach how to connect young adults to local businesses? Can we set this up with job fairs? I'll come back to this idea on the next slide, but I also want to mention that this Jobs for Montana graduates, there's a curriculum and classroom tools available on that website, which you can then modify to meet individual student needs. So it's a lot of great resources, and there's some links to funding opportunities as well. So for this one, I'm going to, just to tie into job service, I'm going to jump down to the third bullet. So it involves interagency collaboration with adult agencies. And so this is a regional job club idea, which may be a really good fit for rural communities across the state as we're seeing some of these gaps. So the handbook link here can help you with a step-by-step guide. It was developed by the Youth Transition Program Specialists in Eastern Oregon. So Eastern Oregon has some really rural communities, and they thought of this as a way to build capacity in those smaller communities by providing access to larger business communities. So it really is a creative way the state can build capacity in job exploration training and resource capacity for our rural communities. So some of the examples that are included in there, the Regional Job Club, you can invite like county-wide schools to a larger community to learn from area businesses, provide job shadowing, tour work sites, listen to experts, meet job service coordinators, listen to VR counselors, among lots of other activities. And then the various schools team each coordinates an event and pulls together adult agencies to help support those efforts. So there could be ways that something like this could tie into regional job fairs or independent living fairs. Some schools, they have student-led fundraising efforts either through social marketing and media or campus fundraising to raise funds for the transportation and other related expenses. So it's something to consider when filling those statewide gaps that we're seeing. And again, that link has step-by-step information. It can be found in the resource section. And moving up, I'm not sure how many of you heard about this exciting news coming out of Montana State University, but in fall of 2018, MSU will be offering a post-secondary education pilot program, and it's going to focus on 4 to 6 students at first, and these students, eligibility requires that students have intellectual or developmental disabilities. They have to be at least 18, they have to have completed high school, and then have a strong desire to attend college. So it's a pilot project starting in the fall. I believe they're accepting application. It's called the Life Scholars Program. And students will attend college courses. They'll participate in college clubs and other extracurricular activities. There'll be work-based learning experiences set up in learning new job skills. And then there'll be the opportunity to have a certificate of completion on either like a 4-year, 2-year, or 1-year program. Does cost the same tuition and fees typical to other student programming, plus there is a fee for the Life Scholars Program. So I'm not sure as far as like financial aid how that falls in place. And finally, another effort has been underway for a while now to help close the service gap between high school graduation and receiving adult services. So there's been advocates across the state continuing to bring bills to the state legislature asking Montana to raise the age for educating students with disabilities through the age of 21. So currently Montana is one of only 2 states in the country that currently exits students with disabilities from high school at age 18. And according to an article in the Independent Record back in January 2017, there are fewer than 20 school districts right now across Montana that are servicing students past the age of 19. And so that, financial impact is placed on the local districts at that point, which can cause it to be complicated. So groups continue to advocate for this change, and hopefully, that this kind of change could help bridge the gap between graduation and adult services. It'll provide additional time to receive diplomas, career development, independent living training, building skills and self-determination, all that. So that's, some efforts to pay attention to as well for trying to fill these gaps. So even with the current state of affairs and with our, the state budget cuts and the impact we're seeing, I hope some of these ideas can help link young adults to adult services, can help bridge some of those gaps, and then maybe fuel creative thinking on how we can use our limited resources to really build the capacity at local levels. Ellen is going to move us into the topic of benefits planning. I'm going to switch you over.
Thanks, Melissa. And I'm going to go back to my screen. Oops, which did not follow along to yours. Sorry. We did not think of that hazard. Okay, so here we are. And so the reason that we're switching over to benefits planning is this is yet another resource that you can still control, or somebody who is receiving or eligible for supplemental security income. In the past years, when the Rural Institute had several different transition demonstration projects, part of the demonstration effort was to work with students who had an ongoing impact of disability, who had long-term support needs, and who people weren't thinking of that they would go to work in the community after they exited high school. And all of the students who were exiting high school had a lot of services that they would now get through pre-ETs. So this is before pre-ETs. So students had, job and career counseling. They had work-based learning. We talked about the impact of work on SSI, and also talked about the potential for Social Security work incentives. So part of the strategy we piloted was, if we identified students who might be eligible for a work incentive called a PASS plan, a plan for achieving self-support, while they were still in school, that, as long as a student is getting supplemental security income, which is based on disability and basically having no resources and very little income, if they were eligible for SSI and they had some sort of income or resource that was reducing that SSI, they could have a PASS plan before they even had a job. And so we did have a couple students who, for whatever reason, were getting SSI, but then maybe a parent died, or they were an adopted child with a disability, and so they also got an adoption subsidy. And so those sources of income reduced the SSI, and so they were eligible for a PASS plan. So what this was, it was a way to generate funding to help that student achieve a vocational goal. So for two students that we worked with, who basically had adoption subsidies and a parent that died, you were able to take the money that was reducing their SSI check monthly, shelter that in a separate account, and basically this was all, you had to write this all out in a plan to Social Security. But basically that gave them access to funding to support their vocational goal. So they could either use that money while they were in school, if that made sense, to pay for job coaching, to pay for transportation, to pay for a wheelchair accessible van, which is what those two brothers actually did. But other people could, we had another young person who wasn't going to be eligible for a PASS plan because when he was a student and working, his wages weren't enough to reduce his SSI check. But the day after graduation, they would. So we wrote a PASS plan, had it approved to start contingent upon him exiting high school with a job, which that really threw the PASS cadre, but as we explained the rationale, they were like, okay, this does make sense. And so his PASS plan only generated maybe $180 a month, which is not much. However, the school had placed him in 3 part-time jobs. He had some voc rehab support to learn the jobs and to be independent on the jobs. And so basically the $180 a month in his PASS plan just paid for somebody to check in on him occasionally and work with him and the employer if anything came up. And we knew that was going to be his long-term support need. All of the students that we worked with in that project were eligible for DD services, developmental disability services. All of them graduated to a wait list. However, those students were employed when they graduated, and we were able to use even very small budgets in the past plans to support them in employment. So part of the job and career counseling and workplace readiness, you know, those are 2 of the 5 categories under pre-employment transition services that all students with disabilities are eligible for right now, regardless of the wait list. Everybody's eligible for pre-employment transition services. Financial literacy can be considered part of that pre-employment transition service. So one thing I do want to share with you are some interesting videos that were created for the state of Idaho, and they're specific to Idaho. And why I'm sharing them with you is that Idaho's numbers are very similar to, let's do this one. Okay, Idaho's numbers are very similar.
There are limits, but you're going to be amazed at how high they are. With the SEIE, you can earn up to $7,350 a year and still get your full SSI benefit. Pretty incredible, huh?
Wow, yeah, that's awesome.
Your monthly earnings also have to be below $1,820 to keep getting the full SSI. Those are the 2018 limits, but they usually go up a little bit each January.
That is great. But what happens if I miss?
Okay, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me now. Basically, these videos were made for the state of Idaho. The state of Idaho purchased them from Griffin Hammes, but they have posted them on YouTube. And so information like this, or if you tweak this information so it's Montana specific, is a perfect example of financial literacy training. And the piece to augment information about impact of wages on SSI would be teaching people about the work incentive past plans and how they can be used. That was a big piece of these pilot projects that we did. And again, like, we were just using small monthly amounts to support people. But because we had done the pre-planning to figure out what folks' ongoing support needs were, and people were placed into paid jobs before they exited high school, we were able to pull it off. And so I think when we're looking at the state of Montana right now, literally, and thinking about we don't have a lot of funds as soon as people exit school. We need to maximize the collaboration of VR in schools, and we need to look at things that typically we haven't had to rely on. And so thinking about, can we look at who's eligible for PASS plans? Can we talk to families so they aren't fearful about students losing SSI when they go to work? Make sure that students are getting benefits analyses and families understand the math, and the student does as well, so they can make informed choices about using a PASS plan or later using an IRWI, which is an impairment-related work expense. And the reason that I talk about PASS plans first is that that will recoup your entire amount of income or SSI that you would lose due to income. With an IRWI, you get reimbursed 50 cents on a dollar for your impairment-related work expenses that you pay out of pocket. So PASS plans are time limited, IRWIs are not, but ideally you would use a PASS first and then an IRWI second. Another option for sheltering some money is called the ABLE Act, which is pretty new. Montana just this year or last year started creating their own ABLE accounts. And basically this is a federal law about Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. And what it allows families or people with adults or people with disabilities to do is shelter up to $15,000 a year for 2018 in an account that doesn't count as a resource. So if you are somebody who gets SSI and Medicaid, your resource limit is $2,000 as an individual. If you have $2,002, you're over the resource limit, and therefore you will lose your Medicaid for that month and your SSI. However, if your money is in an ABLE account, then that doesn't count as a resource. And so there's information about how to set up accounts. And in Montana, you go through DPHHS, and we can send the link out to you if you're interested in this. And again, you can shelter $15,000 a year if you're a young person who is working and earning money. You may be able to put more than that in per year. And you can use that money to help you work, for transportation, for job development, for job coaching, for housing, anything that's disability related. And so to be eligible for an ABLE account, you have to have incurred a disability before age 26. And up to $100,000 in that account is sheltered. So this is the first time that a person's been able to shelter money without using either a self-sufficiency trust or some sort of protected trust or a PASS plan. So this is pretty exciting. And your family can put money in, your friends can put money in, your grandparents can put money in, or you can put money in. And so this isn't something that's going to be helpful for everybody, but it's one more choice of what can be used. So we are getting close to time, but there's a couple other programs. I think the one that's most relevant to our situation right now is New Mexico. In New Mexico, they are doing a lot of work to incorporate work experience and get schools collaborating with Voc Rehab. So all students with disabilities are getting work experience, they're getting job and career counseling, you're thinking about employment, they're thinking about Social Security, but their DD waiver waitlist. So if it's somebody with a developmental disability who needs job coaching or they need residential supports, their wait list is over 15 years. So that's worse than our setting right now. However, what people did was they went to their legislature and said, we need to free up some sort of support, some sort of financial support to help students who are leaving school who want to go to work. And so through Developmental Disabilities, and this is approved every time their legislature meets, they approved that a family or a person with a developmental disability who needed transportation help to get to work could have a voucher of about $250 a year. So this is not huge money. However, that offset the cost of a family, neighbor, or friend to give them rides. And so that helped people to get to work. The other thing that was passed and approved was that if somebody was working and they needed some ongoing job coaching, they would get 10 hours a month of job coach support funded. So again, this isn't a huge amount. However, if a student leaves school with adequate work experience and ideally placement into their paid job before they leave high school, this money could keep them employed. And then they could pursue a PASS plan or potentially an ABLE account to keep that going. There's other collaborative efforts in other states, but I think the one most similar to our situation right now is New Mexico. So I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions.
Just a reminder to audience members, if you would like to ask one of our presenters a question today, you can type your question into the chat box or the question box. So if you don't see that on your screen, go to the upper right-hand area of your computer screen. There should be an orange box with a white arrow in it. Click on that to open your dashboard, and there should be a box that says either questions or chat, and you can put your question in there. And we don't have any yet, Ellen. If you have more information you'd like to share while we give people a chance to type.
Okay, well, I'll go on and give a couple state examples. Washington State in the 1980s had issued their working age adult policy, and it was a policy that prioritized long-term support funding through developmental disabilities to people who wanted to go to work. And how that translated into some of their transition efforts were, especially in King County, which is the largest county in Washington, they were able to put up county developmental disability funds to help school districts work together with community rehab programs. And again, this was before pre-employment transition services and WIOA. But what they were able to do was any student with a developmental disability who was interested in going to work, and this is people with significant disabilities or more milder disabilities, they either started the senior year or the junior year, the last 2 years, and basically the county would kick in $500 a month per student to the school, and that would basically hire a community rehab program that was then embedded in the school, and that employment consultant would work with the students, take what the schools already knew about them through age-appropriate transition assessments and through work experiences, and help place those students into jobs before they exited school. And how the working age adult policy also impacted the waiver services for students once they exited is that any student with a developmental disability who exited high school with a paid job was entitled to long-term supports for that job, for employment. If they didn't exit high school with a job, no support was guaranteed. So this was a really clear message from their legislature about what was priority in Washington State. On the years when Washington State has more money, then they can support everybody who wants to go to work. They don't necessarily have money to pay for residential supports, but they are able to support people in work for long-term supports. But what they found is that in 2016, out of the 144 students that were in that school to work program, basically 100 of those students, so over two-thirds of those students left school with a paid job, which resulted in, at that point, DVR kicked in money to the county, which then gave incentives to the providers if the person was placed in a job and they lasted over 90 days, or they were stable after 90 days. So again, this goes back to some of the earlier information that we revisited at the beginning of this webinar that says, if students have paid jobs before they exit school, and if agencies work together, employment outcomes are a whole lot better for students. Indiana is doing a similar collaborative right now around community employment. They're looking at school to work, adult employment providers, and embedding them in specific school districts. This isn't statewide yet, it's just a pilot. They're funded by VR at the hourly rate to do discovery and job coaching and placement. Currently, assessment or discovery is not considered a pre-ETS activity. So these would be more case services dollars, not pre-ETS dollars. Paying for job coaching and initial paid jobs could be pre-ETS. I mean, not job coaching, but the initial facilitation within the work site, but not placement into an ongoing job. That's case services. And again, what part of the components of this pilot project is that students get a discovery profile, which highlights, it goes beyond what the age-appropriate transition assessment puts together to really highlight all this information and apply it to what the ideal work situation would look like for that person. The student gets internships and work experiences, self-determination training, benefits planning, and the family also gets training around employment, working with agencies, transition, and Social Security. And so the other really effective parts of this collaborative is that, again, it's agencies working together. There's a single point of contact in the school to VR and all the DD agencies. So families and students don't have to piece that together after they leave school. Providers have to be qualified in order to provide work experience and discovery in the schools. And the focus is on quality work experiences, not quantity, but really focusing on making sure those experiences are individualized and each experience grows on the last experience. Delaware has a couple programs that grew out of their Employment First policy. And so there's the Early Start to Supported Employment, which is geared towards students who are going to be needing ongoing supports in order to work in the community. And basically it's Department of Ed and the Division for Blind and Low Vision Services is cost sharing even outreach to students in middle schools, which is pretty exciting. And these families connect with community rehab programs as early as 9th grade. So this is funded through their developmental disability services. But again, as the state is looking at how to save resources and how to restructure funding to make it more cost effective, if we can build the argument that early work experience and placement into community jobs results in more taxpayers in our state of Montana and it's a better investment than letting people wait and sit for services long term, because the cost to get employed and stay employed, it's going to be far less if we get kids just as they're leaving school, and better yet, before they leave school. So you can Google the Delaware Early Start to Supported Employment, and then they have also a Pathways program to employment, and that program isn't limited to students with developmental disabilities. And again, it's more about supporting students to have a variety of internships. And so even though right now it's going to be, these programs aren't going to be offered and readily available, however, as we start going to advocate for services for people to the governor and to the state, let's think about the arguments about where the best investment is. And again, if we create more taxpayers, we benefit the state altogether. And we know that students with disabilities are more likely to be employed if we start early, we expose them to work while they're in high school, and students leave high school with a paid job. And our agencies are working collaboratively to share resources and share the cost. So I'm going to end there. I am going to show you some resources. And these are some of the resources and some of the documents we talked about last time. So the Advisory Committee on Increasing Competitive Integrated Employment, which came out of WIOA, that's their report. The statement around the Department of Justice application of Title II of the ADA, around services need to be offered in inclusive environments if people choose that. WINTAC is the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center. And basically there's lots of resources around PREETs and various areas of WIOA. Here's some additional resources specific to Montana. Here is the latest and greatest resource around unpaid work experience and what's legal according to Department of Labor. And I've had difficulty getting this hot link to work, but if you Google this title, you will get to it. Resources for families on transition and IDEA, Department of Labor and customized employment, your Transition Technical Assistance Center has a competitive integrated employment toolkit. There is a Voc Rehab and Youth Technical Assistance Center that focuses on out-of-school youth and students who are in foster care. The Regional Job Club Handbook from Eastern Oregon, a ton of mental health resources, information on the final settings rules, and then success stories from the Olmstead lawsuits, the U.S. Department of Justice lawsuits. And so if you're looking for visions of people leaving segregated settings and going into community employment and living, there's a ton of resources there. So back to questions.
And while we wait to see if any questions come in, I'd just like to remind everyone, this is Kim again, of the short survey that pops up as soon as you log out of the webinar. And I really encourage you to take time to answer those 8 questions. Also, our next webinar will be Alternatives to Guardianship. That will take place on May 1st from 1 until 2:30 Mountain Time. Teresa and Isaac Baldry will be the presenters, and they will be introducing you to the Alternatives to Guardianship Toolkit, which is now available in draft format on the Transition and Employment Project's website. So we encourage you to sign up for that webinar. The flyer will go out later this afternoon or tomorrow, and again, that will take place on May 1st. Recording for today's webinar and also for part 1, which took place back on March 27th of this webinar, will be posted to our training archives page, and I put the URL or website address for that in your chat box. The recording from part 1 is already up and posted. The recording from part 2 from today's session should be up in about a week. The handouts and the slides for today are available in the handouts section of your webinar dashboard. They are also already posted on our website on the archives page. So if you didn't have a chance to download the handouts and the slides today and you would like to do so, you may go to our training archives page and download them from there. And we do have a question or comment here, Ellen. You gave out a lot of information, but in summary, what are the specific ideas you have researched from other states that you are considering advocating to our state in the future?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I think right now with WIOA, we can get Voc Rehab and schools collaborating. It would be really nice to start having conversations at some point with developmental disabilities coming to the table to really look at how do we prepare students with developmental disabilities to be working in the community when they exit. I think another thing we talked a little bit about at the last session is that there's been a couple family members who have contacted us recently and started working with Teresa Baldry and thinking about how do we get parents reaching out to other parents to make sure that their son or daughters are being expected to work and getting connected with pre-employment transition services that prepare them for work before they leave school.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from any audience members? Any final comments from Ellen or Melissa, from either of you? Okay.
I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, with that, I would like to thank everyone for participating today, and I would especially like to thank both of our presenters, Ellen and Melissa, for the wealth of information which they shared and for all of the resources. If you have questions that you think of after the webinar, please feel free to send me an email and I will make sure to share those with our presenters. And again, please complete the survey. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.